By the 4th century AD, Rome still looked completely invincible, and its power stretched across continents without serious resistance. Its roads connected distant lands, its armies dominated battlefields, and its cities stood as centers of civilization. But deep inside the empire, a crisis had already begun, and no army or weapon could ever stop it. The economic system built on slavery was beginning to fail, weakening the foundation of Rome's strength. Slave labor only worked when Rome expanded constantly, bringing new slaves from endless wars and conquests. When expansion slowed and borders stabilized, the supply of slaves declined, and the system began collapsing. Productivity fell, innovation disappeared, and the empire stopped progressing because slaves lacked motivation. A slave had no incentive to invent, improve systems, or build a better future for the empire. Rome was slowly suffocating under its own outdated structure, trapped inside its old system. In our reality, this became the beginning of Rome's collapse and the end of its dominance. But in this alternate timeline, Rome made a decision no empire had ever made before. Rome abandoned the foundation of its own power in order to survive and evolve. Roman economists, philosophers, and political leaders reached a radical and dangerous conclusion. They realized slavery was weakening the empire instead of securing its long-term future. A free citizen was far more productive than a slave because he had ambition and personal motivation. A free citizen could innovate, improve systems, and actively strengthen the empire's future. The Senate began reforms that initially seemed unthinkable and dangerous to the existing order. Slaves were gradually given the right to earn and eventually purchase their freedom. At first they received limited rights, but over time those rights became full citizenship. The most important change occurred in agriculture, the backbone of Rome's economy. Farmers gained ownership over part of their production, benefiting directly from their labor. They were no longer tools, but active participants in the economic system. For the first time in centuries, millions gained real incentive to work and innovate. The results appeared faster than expected, transforming the empire's economic stability. Production increased dramatically, strengthening Rome's internal economic resilience. Surpluses appeared across regions, allowing expansion of internal and external trade. Trade networks expanded rapidly, accelerating Rome's transition into a new era. In our reality, Christianity eventually became the dominant force controlling political and social systems. But in this alternate world, its role evolved differently and integrated into the empire's structure. Christianity did not replace Rome's political system or seize control of governance. Instead, it became one component within a broader and stable institutional framework. Its values strengthened reforms and supported the transformation of Roman society. Ideas of equality, dignity, and responsibility reinforced loyalty among the population. Citizens became more invested in the empire's long-term success and stability. Religion did not control the state, and the state did not control religion. Both systems coexisted in balance without dominating each other's authority. This prevented religious conflicts that weakened civilizations in other timelines. It also preserved intellectual freedom and allowed scientific progress to continue uninterrupted. Rome avoided internal division and remained unified through shared purpose and stability. From freed slaves and independent farmers, a completely new social class began emerging. This class included craftsmen, engineers, inventors, and skilled technical specialists. They worked not from fear, but from ambition, personal gain, and future opportunity. Their motivation transformed productivity and accelerated technological innovation across the empire. They created more efficient tools and improved existing mechanical systems continuously. Production processes became faster, more reliable, and increasingly optimized for efficiency. Innovation became constant, rather than rare and unpredictable. This new class became the true engine driving the empire's transformation and expansion. Rome's economic strength no longer depended on conquest or forced labor. Instead, it depended on creativity, productivity, and technological advancement. Technological progress accelerated faster than ever before in Roman history. Rome no longer needed endless wars to maintain economic stability. It could grow internally through innovation instead of external conquest. For the first time in its history, Rome voluntarily stopped expanding its territory. Not because it lacked power, but because expansion was no longer economically necessary. Slavery was no longer the foundation of Rome's economic system. War stopped providing meaningful economic benefits to the empire's stability. Instead of conquest, Rome began offering cooperation, trade, and integration. Other civilizations began joining voluntarily, attracted by Rome's stability and prosperity. Life inside the empire became safer, richer, and more predictable than outside it. Rome transformed from a conquering empire into a system of opportunity and advancement. The empire was no longer governed from a single centralized location. It evolved into a distributed network of interconnected regional centers. Constantinople became the primary strategic hub connecting Europe and Asia. Trade, administration, military coordination, and communication flowed through this central node. Each region maintained autonomy while still obeying a unified legal framework. This created unprecedented long-term stability across massive territories. Conflicts between states disappeared because independent states no longer existed. There was only one unified imperial system governing the known world. Technological innovation spread quickly without being lost or forgotten. Knowledge accumulated continuously and built upon previous discoveries. Progress became permanent, and history stopped collapsing backward. Civilization began moving forward without interruption or regression. The most radical transformation was not economic, but political and structural. Imperial power was no longer inherited through bloodlines or family succession. And it was no longer seized through violence or military coups. Emperors were now chosen through a formalized and controlled selection process. Candidates presented detailed programs outlining their vision for the empire's future. They proposed reforms, infrastructure projects, and long-term economic strategies. Leadership became defined by competence rather than military reputation or ancestry. This fundamentally changed the nature of power inside the empire. The Senate became the dominant governing authority overseeing imperial operations. It controlled taxation, budgets, appointments, and enforcement of imperial law. Officials were monitored and held accountable for their decisions and actions. Corruption, once a constant threat, became increasingly rare and difficult. Power was no longer personal property to exploit for individual benefit. It became a responsibility tied directly to performance and public stability. This created continuity, predictability, and trust across the imperial system. The empire no longer depended on the strength of one individual leader. It depended on the stability of its institutional structure. This made collapse far less likely than in previous centuries. Without economic collapse, there was no fragmentation of imperial authority. Without fragmentation, there was no widespread chaos across former territories. Without chaos, civilization never experienced a technological or intellectual regression. Science did not disappear or become suppressed for centuries. Knowledge continued advancing without interruption or permanent loss. Educational institutions expanded and preserved scientific discoveries continuously. There was no feudal system replacing centralized imperial governance. There were no isolated kingdoms competing endlessly for survival and dominance. There were no prolonged destructive conflicts like the 100 Years' War. Because there were no rival nation-states competing for control. There was only one unified system maintaining order and continuity. This system ensured stability across generations and massive geographic distances. People integrated into the empire voluntarily because it offered opportunity. Integration provided safety, prosperity, and predictable long-term development. Civilization advanced consistently instead of collapsing and restarting repeatedly. The Dark Ages never existed in this reality. Human progress never stopped accelerating forward. In our reality, industrialization accelerated through war and national competition. Fear of falling behind forced nations to innovate rapidly and aggressively. But in this alternate timeline, there were no rival nation-states. There was no arms race pushing technological development through destruction. And yet, industrialization still began earlier than in our world. By the 15th century, Roman engineers developed primitive steam-powered machines. These machines were designed for productivity, not warfare or military dominance. They increased efficiency across agriculture, mining, and manufacturing sectors. Workshops began transitioning from manual labor to mechanical assistance. Production capacity increased steadily across imperial territories. Industrial cities began forming as economic centers of innovation. Technology spread rapidly because there were no borders restricting knowledge. However, progress occurred differently than in our reality. It developed more slowly, but far more safely and sustainably. There were no wars accelerating invention through destruction and urgency. Technology evolved to build infrastructure, not to destroy enemies. By the 17th century, mechanical computational devices began appearing. These machines assisted with engineering, navigation, and economic planning. The foundation for a technological civilization had fully formed. Once industrial transformation stabilized, the empire looked beyond known continents. The oceans were no longer barriers limiting exploration and expansion. They became highways connecting distant regions of the planet. Roman ships equipped with advanced navigation crossed the Atlantic Ocean. They reached vast continents previously unknown to imperial civilization. North America and South America revealed enormous new opportunities. These lands were rich in resources and natural potential. But they were already inhabited by independent indigenous civilizations. Initial contact created tension, uncertainty, and mutual misunderstanding. Trust did not develop immediately between both sides. But Rome was no longer dependent on conquest or forced expansion. Its economy no longer required slavery or territorial destruction. Instead of armies, Rome sent merchants, engineers, and diplomats. Trade relationships gradually formed between both civilizations. Technology, culture, and resources were exchanged peacefully over generations. Indigenous societies adapted and integrated at their own pace. There was no mass extermination or civilizational collapse. These continents became provinces through integration, not destruction. Rome expanded through cooperation instead of violence. While Rome expanded peacefully across the oceans, a new force emerged. Far to the east, a powerful and aggressive empire began rising rapidly. It was built not on infrastructure, but on speed and military mobility. The Mongol Empire expanded faster than any civilization in history. Its armies moved across continents, destroying entire political systems. Borders collapsed before them with terrifying efficiency and speed. Entire civilizations disappeared under the pressure of Mongol expansion. But when Mongol forces reached the borders of imperial territories, everything changed. They encountered something fundamentally different from their previous enemies. Not fragmented kingdoms weakened by internal political division. Not unstable states lacking centralized command and economic coordination. They encountered a unified civilization operating as a single system. Roman infrastructure allowed rapid movement of troops and resources. Communication networks transmitted information faster than Mongol scouts could travel. Industrial production ensured continuous supply of equipment and defenses. The empire was prepared in ways no civilization had ever been before. The Mongols could not break a system that functioned as one entity. Conflict stalled and gradually transformed into cautious coexistence. Trade slowly replaced warfare as both sides recognized mutual advantage. The Mongol Empire became Rome's first true external rival. But it never became its conqueror. While Mongolia stabilized as a neighbor, Rome continued expanding influence peacefully. Maritime trade routes connected Rome with distant Asian civilizations. China became one of the empire's most important economic partners. Goods moved continuously between both civilizations across secure ocean routes. Silk, machines, tools, and knowledge circulated between continents. Technological advancement accelerated through this global exchange. Roman ships eventually reached the islands of Japan. Contact occurred before isolationist military rule could emerge. Japan integrated gradually through trade, diplomacy, and technological cooperation. It became one of the empire's most advanced regional partners. Australia was discovered later during continued global exploration. Its isolation and low population allowed rapid integration into imperial structure. New cities formed along coastal regions supported by imperial infrastructure. Economic networks expanded across every continent on Earth. The empire became a planetary-scale system of coordination. Not through conquest, but through integration and mutual benefit. The world was no longer divided into competing political systems. It became one interconnected civilization. Rome no longer expanded through force. It expanded through stability, opportunity, and technological leadership. By this point, the empire had existed for thousands of continuous years. It had evolved beyond the definition of a traditional political state. It became a civilizational system coordinating global development. Its power was no longer measured through territorial borders. It was measured through influence, infrastructure, and economic integration. Former colonies grew into strong, independent regional governments. They developed their own economies, cultures, and political identities. But they did not separate completely from imperial structure. They became autonomous partners within a unified global framework. Their relationship resembled cooperation rather than political subordination. A shared legal system connected these regions into one civilization. A shared economic network ensured stability and continuous prosperity. Rome no longer ruled through military force or coercion. It maintained unity through mutual benefit and long-term planning. Other major civilizations developed alongside the empire peacefully. African states grew into powerful and technologically advanced societies. India became one of the world's primary scientific centers. China evolved into a massive industrial and technological superpower. Japan became a leader in engineering and maritime systems. Russia remained a powerful and stable imperial civilization. It was never weakened by catastrophic global wars. Communism never emerged because its historical conditions never formed. There was no First World War destabilizing global political order. There was no Second World War destroying entire continents. Technological development progressed without arms races or global destruction. Nuclear energy was discovered and developed for peaceful purposes. It powered cities, transportation, and planetary infrastructure. It was never used as a weapon of mass destruction. The empire operated without fear of global annihilation. It operated through stability, planning, and systemic coordination. It no longer resembled a country. It resembled a unified planetary civilization. Its structure resembled something from science fiction. Distributed centers of governance coordinated planetary activity. Stability became the empire's most important governing principle, because stability ensured infinite continuation. And now, for the first time in its history, the empire looked beyond Earth itself. Rome did not survive because of military superiority. It did not survive because of conquest or domination. It survived because it chose transformation instead of preservation. It abandoned slavery, the system that once defined its economy. It abandoned hereditary power that created unstable leadership. It abandoned endless war as a tool of growth. It replaced domination with integration and development. This decision changed the trajectory of human civilization forever. Rome survived because it adapted when adaptation was necessary. That decision made it effectively immortal. In our world, these reforms never happened in time. The empire collapsed under the weight of its own structure. Civilization fragmented into competing states and endless conflict. Knowledge was lost and progress slowed for centuries. Humanity developed through war instead of stability. But in another possible timeline, everything changed. Rome never fell. Humanity unified thousands of years earlier. And the future began much sooner.